And we're back.
Yes, it seems like an eternity.
It does, Mark, it does. It's wonderful to be back here with the Impact Narrative. My friend, colleague, co-host, rival for my interviewee chair.
The plant.
Indeed.
But apart from the plant, me.
Indeed, Mark. Hey,
Yeah.
It's nice to be back. Nice to see you.
Good. It seems like you've, not changed at all.
Oh, I think I've caught some sun, but
Right.
probably nothing other than that.
Not too visible, but I guess, with us, we've been basking since you went away.
So I hear, yeah. Tropical.
Yes, indeed. The tropic being, is it a tropic? Is it in a tropic? Antarctica. But anyway, it's been similar. And you're about to experience the same kind of thing that we did in miniature.
Apparently so, for about 24 hours.
And the Beast from the East is, I'm afraid, horribly topical and will probably feature in this...
I think it probably will. But Mark, I've got to begin by saying what an excellent job you did last week.
Well, you've said that, yes, so often now that it's wearing off.
But I wanted to get it on the record, on the Impact Narrative itself. I thought you and Sophie did a wonderful job, and we're keen to get Sophie back on the
Oh, we are indeed, absolutely. I'm more than keen. I mean, I think, it's time that I went to India and Sophie became
Excellent.
me.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure we can sort out the latter, if not the former.
Indeed.
But anyway, it's been a busy week, as always, Mark. It's been a busy few weeks, in fact, so we've got a lot to cover today. Yeah.
Arsene Wenger has gone from villain to hero to about to resign at the end of the season.
Yeah.
So, well, enough of that.
Manager, perhaps. And very amusing what happened to Manchester United last night.
Yeah, so we've got to talk about this just to show the breadth of our interests.
Of course.
And Cheltenham's going on. It's. I remember giving a seminar. It must have been 19 years ago, which I interrupted to listen to Flaky Dove winning at, I've forgotten, 9-2 or something, and I'd invested heavily on it.
Excellent.
That brings back the glory days.
What prompted you to invest in Flaky Dove?
Flaky Dove. Well, I was a mad horse racing fan.
But it's such a bizarre name.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't matter what the name. It's a horse, isn't it?
Right.
Really?
I thought
What's
it was
in
only
a
about
name?
the names.
There's a theory that no badly named horse ever wins the Derby. So, something like Mr. Cheeky Chops would never win, or, Horsey McHorseface would never win the Derby.
Okay, shame.
But, anyway.
But, on the point of seminars and talks and whatnot, you were about to give a Harry Potter lecture, I believe.
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Oh, was that when you...
That was as I was about to leave. So
Well, that sounds like that is an eternity ago. Yeah, no, I did a few adjustments here and there.
Is this going to be tweaked to reflect the developments of the Fantastic Beasts and where to find them?
No, that's fair. I don't like spin-offs very much. And so
You're a purist at heart.
That's right, The Cursed Child. I just thought it was good, actually. If it was a self-standing thing, it would be good, but I just thought it's a spin-off. Therefore,
on the important Harry Potter topic, what's the best book in the series, do you think?
Oh, Prisoner of Azkaban. Well, that's the best. Why?
Oh, just out of curiosity.
You've read them all?
I have.
Right.
Of course.
I'm a Prisoner of Azkaban man.
Right.
Because I just think there's more kind of drama in that one. Character development, humour.
Indeed.
Deaths, that sort of thing.
Tragedy.
Well, no, there are. I can't remember.
Shakespearean.
In its sweeping encapsulation of the human condition.
Indeed.
Hannah Arendt would have liked it.
She would have loved
Our
it.
sponsor.
Indeed, yeah.
Right.
So anyway,
so that's the end of that bit.
Where do we start, Mark? Where do we start with everything that's
Well,
been happening?
well, we could. I mean, it's
I
just.
should just say my plant is not looking particularly healthy. You.
No, I'm sorry to say that, but it was exhausted after its efforts a couple of weeks ago. But very quickly, I mean, I'm afraid a lot of chickens seem to be coming home to roost, and Mourinho's tactics just that. Oh, sorry, no. Really, you've got almost a perfect storm. It seems to me.
In Manchester.
Well, in the dressing room, yeah. But you've got a situation where the British government is behaving, should we say, pugnaciously towards our European allies, where there's been dithering about whether we want Mr. Trump to come over for any kind of visit, let alone a state visit, and right in the middle of our disputes or cool or even worse relations with people supposed to be our best allies, our closest allies, we're exposed to the beast from the east.
We are indeed.
And the thing about this is the chicken coming home to roost thing, which I'm sure you'll have views on as well, that Britain has I think, on the one hand, been non-discriminatory in its treatment of you've got two groups of people who are both problematic. One, people who are great friends of Putin, and two, people who are enemies of Putin. Either of those groups is potentially troublesome to the country they choose to make their home in. The friends of Putin are almost certainly, it seems, people who may be involved in activities which we wouldn't find all that savoury. If they're on his side, then they're kind of, in a way, party to... and the oligarchs, obviously, their money didn't necessarily come from the sweat of their brow. Mr. Abramovich, has obviously worked his way up in many ways.
Got a sweaty brow when he's sitting on his yacht or his...
It would be difficult to say that he, with his wealth, that Bill Gates did things to get his. Sure. Mr. Abramovich seems to have been a different kind of beast from the East, should we say. But Britain has just said, we want your money. And you see, what has happened there is that when, at the same time, we played one side against the other by being hosts to people who were quite straightforwardly enemies of Mr. Putin.
Exactly.
And so what you've got is a situation where, obviously the Litvinenko episode was probably the first of its kind.
Well, we'll get onto that in a little bit, I think.
Yeah, but I hope I'm not going to steal your thunder, but it seems to me that there are people here who Mr. Putin perhaps, none of this is proven, let's say the Russian regime is not friendly towards,
sure.
And we are seemingly turning a blind eye to all things Russian. Therefore, why not turn a blind eye to activities of the kind which are alleged to have happened now? In other words, we're a soft touch, and we're an isolated soft touch. And I don't know, you will know because you're a tweet person, a tweet monger.
Tweeter.
But I don't think Mr. Trump, I was going to call him Mr. Tweet there, which in the end somebody might. I don't think he's tweeted on this, has he? Whereas he tweets on absolutely everything, like supporting racist propaganda issued by racist groups from Britain. He's quite happy to tweet about that, but not a very serious diplomatic incident which should call together the united ranks of Britain's allies. But we're on a limb, and I would think that the administration has said this is a horrible, difficult situation, but it's not really our problem. Well, and the EU has probably said it probably is at least partly our problem, but Britain can take the strain of this.
Well, what's interesting about the Russian and the US response to this incident is that this morning Mr. Trump has sacked his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson.
Last night.
Was it last night? I apologise.
Sorry, I'm going to keep my voice down.
And has replaced him with Mike Pompeo.
Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that. I've just about got used to Mr. Tillerson.
But
Mr. Tillerman, in fact. No, that's T for the Tillerman. The P45 for the Tillerman. Cat Stevens' album of the 70s that was never made. Anyway, Mr. Tillerson.
Tumbleweed.
Rex.
Indeed, has allegedly been sacked not only for his differing stance on the Iranian nuclear deal from Mr. Trump. Mr. Tillerson was historically a bit more in favour of the deal, and obviously Mr. Trump has been a very vocal critic of it. But allegedly, Mr. Tillerson also was very outspoken about events in the UK last week.
Well, he was sort of outspoken, actually. I mean, Boris Johnson said, "Oh, it's great that he's on side." There was almost a little bit of relief in Boris Johnson's voice, but it seems, and again, this is where, alas, we're having to speculate. But it would seem that North Korea might be more a point of difference between Trump. And but again, I mean, Trump's silence, speculation upon speculation. Sure. Russia is a subject area that perhaps Mr. Trump doesn't want to get into because of certain things, about the last election.
Exactly. There's a very serious investigation going on in the US right now about Trump's relationship with Russia, and a number of figures who are close to the Trump administration, senior diplomats, who have been involved in peripheral negotiations with the UAE, with Qatar, with the Saudis, and it's not quite clear exactly what this relationship hoped to achieve, or what these dialogues hope to achieve, but it's pretty obvious that something has gone down that's that's somewhat nefarious, that isn't exactly clear about who's driving this agenda. Because if you remember, when Mr. Trump was voted in as president, many thought that it would lead to a period of rapprochement between Putin and Trump and Russia and the US, because of their similar backgrounds and this perceived mutual respect for one another. But there was an initial period anyway of friction.
Well, yeah, again, speculation, but so much of that could be smoke and mirrors, could it not? I mean, it seems to me almost one could say, in hindsight, should be staring us in the face. Equally, we could be completely miles wide of the mark. But you could wonder whether Mr. Trump has been confronted with this situation where, at least on the face of it, Russia must be involved. I mean, that's what people are speculating at any rate. And it's confronted him with a kind of line in the sand. Does he openly denounce the Putin regime seriously, or does he keep quiet or whatever? And he's chosen to keep quiet, and it could well be that is showing us that there always has been a close relationship between, and that certain spats have been engineered to make it look like there isn't a close relationship with. I mean, certainly you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to think that this would be a sensible way for Mr. Trump to proceed. If you're alleged to be too close to a regime which is seen as unfriendly to your country, then the best thing to do is to at least make some show of being hostile to that hostile power. But anyway.
Well, I think it's quite interesting that in the past few days, Mrs. May has been pretty clear that it was Russia that was responsible. There's a deep suggestion in her comments on this that Russian actors were behind it, be it sponsored by the Kremlin or more individual actors. But then this morning, the Foreign Office released a statement and released a short video on Twitter documenting all of Russia's pernicious actions, not only in the UK, going back to Alexander Litvinenko in 2006, but also in Georgia, in Ukraine, and now events in Salisbury. So there is a long history of Russian manipulation. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office has now firmly put its position front and centre of this.
Yeah, and what the list may not include is the regular infringements of British airspace by, but again, there are now, I think, as of last night, with another death, we've got 15, I think it is now, cases, certainly 14 or 15 cases of mysterious, unexplained deaths, which the British government seem not to want to investigate. Boris Berezovsky.
Yes.
Who was, of course, not only an opponent to Mr. Putin, but a really quite ebullient opponent. I mean, very almost a self-publicist on the anti-Putin front. And then, it was reported. I remember thinking he must have met an involuntary end, but the explanation that he had killed himself was accepted by the British media, just simply without any. It was all taken on trust, it seems to me.
It's a very difficult position, I think, diplomatically, because if it's suggested that, if it's proved that the Russians were involved in the deaths of Alexander Litvinenko...
Well, that has been proved.
Boris Berezovsky, the poisoning of Sergei Skripal, then that is essentially a breach of British sovereignty.
Absolutely, yeah, and the thing which, of course, we've defended so valiantly in our referendum.
Exactly.
But we'd already surrendered it because these people, the oligarchs, are buying up London, and nobody was doing anything to stop them.
And I think there's more to explore there, and we'll get onto that in a little bit, Mark. With regard to the Saudis and the Qataris and all of your favourite people.
Love them all.
But I think that this is a really crunch moment. Because I think it was last week that Mr. Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, said that if it is proved, then British dignitaries will not be sent to the World Cup.
Well,
which is such a sort of benign response.
But you see the rot at the heart of so many institutions, not just Britain, but FIFA. Why on earth did they give the World Cup to Russia? It just beggars belief. And then friend the Qataris, and I think obviously we are it's nothing to do with my argument here that we're going to go out in the first, you know, we won't get we won't get out of our group, I think is the but I mean the fact is that British football fans would be very ill advised to go.
They would.
Whatever. And so I think I think that pulling out of the World Cup, personally, I think that would be the kind of thing that might just about settle this for the time being.
It should be said that Mr. Johnson didn't advocate pulling out of the World Cup.
But the dignitaries...
He just said that the dignitaries wouldn't go.
I mean, I'm sure the Russians are going to be very upset if Kate and Wills don't turn up. No, I mean, in our case, it's not dignitaries anymore, it's indignitaries. Yeah. Because we are, I'm afraid, a supplicant state, a serf state of Russia. We have... voluntarily surrendered so many things to that country, and I think it's time, you know. Anyway, but what else can we do? And this is the other thing. You know, BP has got vast interests in Russia. Sure. It may be that the Russians think it's in their self-interest to keep that deal going. Equally, why don't they just sequestrate all of BP's assets in Russia? You know, in the end, this is a relationship which I don't think we have any weapons with which to cause anything other than, you know, a kind of a face-saving gesture. Sure. The World Cup is our face-saving gesture and money-saving and disgrace-saving gesture, because we won't be knocked out in the group stage.
You mentioned
we'll be undefeated in this year's World Cup.
The football, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about Qatar and about how the Qatari state has got the World Cup despite having no history of football, no national infrastructure.
Ideally suited.
But in Russia there's been, I think, far less coverage of it, in spite of rampant homophobia, deep-seated structural racism.
In some places, we're not tarring all Russians with the same brush, of course, and you know, this is the trouble, that this is a fantastic country, and the people are absolutely fantastic, but it's been a tragedy for more than 100, since
structural
Tsarist days.
Issues.
Yeah.
Within the Russian state, and we saw a lot of these come into the fore at the European Championships almost 2 years ago, with the fighting between some Russian fans and some of the English fans, some of the French police, I believe. So
and even before this spat, the Russians seem to regard the British football fans as their favourite partners in combat. Anyway,
worrying times ahead. But going back to London, and you mentioned the Russian oligarchs owning good chunks of London. Other parts of it are owned by the Saudis, by the Qataris, and last week we saw the visit of the
Crown Prince.
Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, a 33-year-old Crown Prince who will, assuming he's not assassinated or toppled, deposed by members of the Al Saud family, which is a possibility, given the various factions at play, but I'd say highly unlikely, then this is a man who's going to be one of the most influential figures in world politics for the next half century, I'd argue. He came to Britain, and there was an interesting propaganda campaign that was being waged and played out across the streets of London. I don't know if you saw any of this.
No.
But there were billboards that were welcoming MBS to London.
No.
There were counter billboards and vans driving around saying that he needed to face questioning and face legal consequences for his actions in Yemen. And it should be stressed that Mohammed bin Salman has a very belligerent anti-Iranian foreign policy that's taken Saudis and their allies into Yemen with a pretty devastating military campaign against Houthi rebels and their Iranian backers, or perceived Iranian backers. But obviously domestically as well, he's been at the vanguard of a process of reform, trying to drive out corruption from the state, and he's incredibly popular with young Saudis.
Right.
Who see that he's a shining light, a beacon of reform in a kingdom that is in dire need of that. But the question is, does the UK want to be firmly associated with a crown prince, a future ruler of a state that is complicit in what the UN has called war crimes in Yemen, and
violations of human rights at home?
Exactly.
Well, the answer to your question, the answer to your question is yes, we do.
For what reason?
I mean, our views are irrelevant.
I would agree with you.
Well, I'll tell you. Well, the thing that was incredible was that Jeremy Corbyn raised all those things in Prime Minister's questions last week, and Theresa May's answer was, they're an important ally for us. And then she went on to say there are hundreds of people still alive in Britain who would be dead without the. But hang on a minute. The allegation produced by Jeremy Corbyn was that the terrorist groups who may be in a position to cause hundreds of deaths are actually funded by senior Saudis. And so she's kind of really tantamount. She was saying they haven't caused quite as many deaths as they would otherwise have done had it not been for the special. And it was the most vile, pathetic, craven answer, but it worked. You know, and Corbyn, of course, has blundered a little bit, I think, quite seriously over the Russian thing. But this was a perfectly, you know, and in the end, what they're saying is we don't care about the human rights issues because they keep us afloat, and because of this self-inflicted wound of Brexit, we need them more than ever.
Exactly, yeah.
It's humiliating.
I think human rights and norms and international conventions and treaties have been sacrificed on the altar of Brexit and survival.
Well, and will increase, but they always have been. I mean, in my lecture on British foreign policy a couple of weeks ago, I drew people's attention to something I think we should do more work on, the Death of a Princess episode in the early 1980s, when the government, faced with unequivocal evidence of how barbaric the regime, well, it may have reformed slightly, but it certainly stoned to death people for adultery and things like that in those days. And the Foreign Secretary, Lord Carrington, apologised to the Saudi government for the fact that a programme exposing these things had been shown on British television. And so, you know, and it wasn't long after that, of course, that a deal was signed to supply arms to the Saudis, and Mark Thatcher received a large sum of money. And this isn't allegedly, this is all true. Yeah. Unbelievable how, again, when a country declines and it's trying to conceal from its people the extent of its decline, it does things which make sure that the decline will not be dignified.
Sure.
We will become more and more undignified as time goes on. Let's just hope that this, and Stephen Hawking, again, media values, Sophie and I talked about this a bit, that first of all, the face-off with Russia was overshadowed by the Tillerson thing, and the BBC website has Trump sacks Tillerson. I don't think many people in Britain have heard of Tillerson. No. I don't think I'd heard of, because I think he's a Cat Stevens album or whatever. And then Stephen Hawking passing, that's knocked the Russia thing down. And so all the papers were saying ultimatum to Russia and all this kind of thing. And now hopefully there'll be a media refocus onto other things. You know, Ken Dodd's passing was knocked out by the Russia thing. Stephen Hawking is, you know, a bigger international figure, and so the BBC will they'll think that the Russian story's been running a bit too long now. Let's move on to other things. Anyway,
and the thing that will crop up tomorrow, of course, is the 7th anniversary of the Syrian uprisings, which was explored very articulately
by Sophie,
by Sophie
and the
last
plant
week.
I thought was very good.
Exactly.
Anyway, what's the next on? I mean, so to sum all that up, it's an absolutely ghastly situation, and to be honest, I would, if they could do something, I think pulling out the World Cup would be great for all sorts of reasons. I say the safety of fans, the fact that pulling out dignitaries will not make a ha'porth of difference, and you know, in the end, we're going to lose.
We are. So, face-saving all round.
Yeah.
Mark, we are rapidly running out of time.
Oh no. So what's next?
We still have a lot to cover. There's the events in North Korea.
Oh right, we don't know anything at all about those. Thank God, there's a media blackout.
There is, but there's allegedly talks taking place between Mr. Trump and the North Korean regime. Yeah. Which is interesting.
And of course the world is thinking about those things much more about the Russian face-off with...
But what's interesting is that type of dialogue, those types of talks have come about through ignoring the normal diplomatic channels and ignoring standard diplomatic protocol. Yeah. So,
and you could see, unfortunately, you could say it is, Trump will see it as a vindication of his hardline rhetoric. And funnily enough, you know, I think there might be something in that. There might be, because clearly, you know, that the North Koreans think that the American regime is rational, and all their wargaming has been on the premise that the Americans are rational. If you change the terms of things, all the things that they were previously getting away with and doing, it suddenly becomes much more problematic. But the trouble is, that style of diplomacy may well work in that particular context. In other contexts, then it could easily lead the world into great danger.
I think that's got to be stressed, that diplomacy is contingent on a range of factors, including personalities, but also including socioeconomic factors, political ideologies, and events, not only in particular regions, but also globally. So I think contingency must be stressed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Mark, we're out of time.
Right.
That has flown by.
It has, hasn't it?
Absolutely flown by. Very quickly, book of the week. Do you have one?
Well, I did read Fallout while you were away, which is Tim Shipman's account of politics since the world went mad, since June to May 2016.
And how was it?
It's great, and it's another one which the guy is clearly somebody with good sources on both.
Sure.
In the end, it's still about Remain and Leave, this thing, and the Leave people all come out of this book very poorly, even though he is clearly trying to be impartial. The Remain people don't come out of it very well. Jeremy Corbyn doesn't come out of it very well, and the election is seen in a much different light than how much of that was pure luck, and how, given it was the worst election campaign in history by the Conservatives, Labour should have done better and all that kind of thing. But it's still extremely thought-provoking. Contemporary history, I would say, almost at its best, with too much swearing in it. And that's the spin doctors and the advisors have all become the people in that programme, the thick of it.
Yes.
They're all now basing themselves, the thick of it was imitating what spin doctors did. Now the spin doctors are imitating, and it's disgusting.
So it has become reality.
And these people are of no calibre whatsoever, and Theresa May was basically under the control of advisors who are unelected and have limited, in my view, depth of character, and it's very, very worrying. Another thing to be nicely worried about. But Newcastle are soaring away from the relegation zone, so all is okay.
Indeed. Well, as predicted, this was a very cheery episode of the Impact Narrative.
Well, it ended on a great note, 3-0.
Hopefully next week will be equally cheery. Arsenal progressing to the next round of the Europa League. And
another false dawn for you to celebrate.
Exactly. So, until next time, Mark.
Indeed, it's goodbye from all of us, including Alexis.
Until next week. Until then, you can follow us in all the usual ways. You can find us online. Find us on Twitter at Richardson Institute. Find us on YouTube at The Impact Narrative and Richardson Institute. And you can find Mark on Twitter as well, tweeting with all of your feedback and thoughts.
You can't really.
Dr.Mark Garnett.
And you can follow us on The Spine, which is still impassable.
Indeed.
But otherwise, the university is never better. It's a wonderful place.
Until next week, thanks for watching.